I think it was made possible by the fact that it was that kind of an era. In fact, an era when we could be projecting liquids on the screen as well as on the band. And the band didn't mind disappearing into the liquids. It was sort of a little pre kind of the star notion, or there was a period when the star notion in rock and roll kind of went to one side for a while, and the band was
very short while.
It was a very short while. But the bands at the Shrine would sometimes turn around, they'd see what was something fascinating was going on. They'd turn around and play to the screen so they could see it too. And you know, once you got into an era when you needed big Klieg lights on all the members, and it was the dance moves of the star that was this, you know, then the light show had to go somewhere else. And most of the time it was being performed in lofts and so forth. It was with recorded music, with minimalist composers, and Michael could speak to that more.
Well, after the rock era, we did do that, and we worked with Max Newhouse's a version of John Cage's Variations 4. We worked with Steve Reich's Come Out. At one point, I actually took a couple of mics and put them out on the lobby, on the marquee of the Fox Venice, and we recorded the street and had it right angles to our screen, and so it was just the ambient sound, and that was inspired a lot by reading John Cage and thinking about his way of thinking about music. I think the communal aspect, though, we just kind of skipped over. Before going back to that, I've just mentioned that in these rock shows, most of you who are not familiar with that era and how things worked, in fact, as David was saying, the band was covered with the light show, and there were no theatrical lights at all. There was a follow spot.
But we talked to the people doing the lights, made sure they were
I don't remember any lights,
and kept them reasonably low. You know,
yeah.
we coordinated with them.
I truly remember no other lights but ours, but there you go. But we're always disagreeing. Yes, like David mentioned earlier, it's like herding cats. So but the important thing was there was the follow spot, and I noticed that the more theatrical bands, the Who, for instance, had a good sense of theater and theater rock. So Townsend wore a white jumpsuit, so he would pop out and have some presence. And some bands cared about that, others didn't. Arthur Brown had a flaming helmet, and they made sure the lights were down for that. But the communal aspect, I think, was very important. I took it seriously. I was living on a commune in Topanga Canyon, which ultimately that Evan Ingvar had started. Evan decided we would merge with Hugh Romney's commune, the Hog Farm, and we went out and I looked at that. But I was in the Santa Monica Mountains in Topanga, and I just couldn't see moving to smoggy, hot Sunland. Also, they were taking their light show tour on the road, which is something my group had talked about doing. We were going to put together also a kind of a psychedelic carnival. And we were going to go, but they were going to go through the Deep South. And I had a deep fear of the Deep South. So they sort of separated the men from the boys, to use a sexist term, and I stayed behind. But the fact was, as we did these shows of a smaller number of people, especially with the Hog Farm, there was what times? 20 people projecting, you'd say?
I'd say 12. 12, but then there would be all the
12
folks
to
who
20.
would help wash plates and so forth to get in.
Sure.
Yeah.
When we went down to a smaller number, we began to concentrate more, and we also moved around to the front of the screen. David could talk about the iterations we did in terms of screen as we tried to figure out how things would work best. But we got down to a pretty tight ensemble, and then we were always rehearsing in our studio in Venice at Joe Funk's litho shop. So every week we rehearsed constantly, we developed new materials, and we listened to at least the headliner act's music, tried to figure out what would be appropriate to work with their music, and tried to change what we did. We didn't just do the same set every time. We really worked to change materials. In fact, for the Velvet Underground, we determined we'd do the whole show in black and white. It was completely monochrome and very fitting.
Well, let's do one or two others. And then Peter, actually, talk a bit more. There's a change in effort when it went to the Fox Venice, or a change in the notion.
Well, after
talk about that.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay. After the Shrine, we actually got very arty. I mean, Jeff Perkins discovered In C by Terry Riley, and he started to work with. The problem with a light show is you're doing it spontaneously, so that if it's music that changes suddenly, you just can't work with it. The Doors, for example, were impossible to work with. But minimal music, which is repetitive, was very easy. And so we would gravitate towards very slow-moving music. The hard part to realize about it is that we had no communication among ourselves
as to what we were going to do, or we didn't say you should lower your light or something. We never did that.
Yeah, and Peter, that is a part of the collective. That we work not only as a financial collective in terms of pooling our resources, but we were working on the screen as an artistic collective mentally. We weren't communicating verbally, it was exactly communicating on the screen with what we did, and that was something fairly unique, I think.
Yeah, we should move forward to our current incarnation.
I'm going to ask Larry a question. We'll get there. So Larry, tell me about when you got involved and how as well, please.
Myself. Well, my first involvement was I was interning with Sam Francis, mixing his paints, and he thought that I should see this group that was performing. Michael's liquids are very San Francisco. So he brought me around. He introduced me. I tagged along. I was the kid, being substantially younger than the rest of these guys. My first experience actually with the bird, I was actually at one of the Pinnacle shows, but I was the kid, so I would load the. One of my favorite little stories is I would be loading 16mm films and threading them through the old gizmos as the grown-ups were making their show. And on one particular, we were up on this scaffolding, this rickety scaffolding that would move around as we would move around. And I rapidly loaded a big 1,000-foot reel of 16 film. And then the projector was turned on and we were watching the screen, and all of a sudden there was a pure white rectangle. And that didn't seem right. And we were all in various stages of light appreciation ourselves at the time. And I looked up and I saw that the big reel that I had just loaded was not there anymore. And it had wobbled off and fallen 15 feet down into the audience. These things weigh, 12 pounds or something like that, and they have sharp edges. So there was a moment there. And I looked over and there was the reel of film right in the ground with all the hippies looking at it and looking. That was my trial by failure as in the day.
I was wondering if any of you, since you mentioned San Francisco, of course, but could talk about Single Wing's, relationship with the general art community in Los Angeles. That, like, how many people from non-film art, say, were coming to shows? There's a long section, of course, in Gene Youngblood's book, Expanded Cinema, describing some various people who attended. But in what ways were you all interacting with the general art community? In what ways was the art community coming and seeing the show or interacting with you?
Well, I was very happy. Living in Topanga, Wally Berman was there, George Herms, a number of other artists, and they would come to our shows. The shows we're doing in the Loft, particularly at the Fox Venice, but also in Sam Francis's Ashland studio. Ed Moses, what other artists can you guys think of that we were interacting with at the time?
Well, Aeneas Jim was supposedly a Joe Funk show.
She wasn't supposedly. She was there. I talked to her. And
She wrote about it in her diaries. Yeah, yeah.
That's good.
She was there with Henry Miller.
I don't remember that we interacted with the art world very much. Though Sam, the most important artist in the city, was our backer, but he introduced us to his patrons and so on, and we did a show at the Santa Barbara Museum. We tried out at the Taper, but the unions wouldn't let us in. But and we had our own little audience, our people who would get stoned and come and watch us. I do have to mention that out of that grew, if anybody was around in the 70s, the actual Fox Venice Theater, which played repertory cinema. And the light show was kind of behind that. So, I don't know, we entertained people. We were more entertainers than, but he says no, and we did try to, I think we were developing an art form. To jump forward, I think it's very important to realize that our backer now is Mr. Jans.
I think Adam was going to
Jump forward.
jump forward later on.
But let's give a hand to the current backer.
Yeah.
But, so that's an interest, of course, as well, that this practice, though, still needs a backer, right? It's not like commercially independently viable yet.
No, it really never was. I mean, David mentioned the $1,200, and that's something like $7,000 in today's money. That was pretty good for doing these bi-weekly shows. But when we were working in our loft spaces with smaller audiences, even when we charged, you know, a $2 suggested donation at the gate, there was no way we could recoup even the money for replacing the bulbs and the projectors, let alone all the other expenses.